On February 28, 2026, the United States launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran with three stated objectives. Objective 1. End Iran's nuclear program, permanently. Objective 2. Destroy Iran's military capabilities. Objective 3. Create the conditions for regime change in Tehran. Today is April 10, 2026, 41 days later, and Vice President J.D. Vance is flying to Islamabad, Pakistan, not Tehran, not Washington, to sit across a table from Iranian negotiators and discuss the terms of Iran's own 10-point peace proposal. The nuclear program is still running. Iran's military is still firing. The supreme leader is still in power, and the United States is negotiating on the basis of conditions that Iran wrote. I want you to hold that sequence in your mind for a moment, because what it describes is not complicated, and yet almost nobody in the mainstream media is stating it plainly. America went to war with three goals. 41 days later, it has achieved 0 of them, and the side that achieved 0 of its goals is now sending its vice president to negotiate from the losing position, while calling it a victory. This is what I want to analyze today, not the diplomatic theater of Islamabad, not the optimistic headlines about workable frameworks. The structural reality of who holds leverage at this negotiating table, and why that matters for everything that comes next. Let me start with the facts on the ground, because facts are the foundation of everything. When Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, the United States deployed 2 aircraft carrier strike groups to the region, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Harry S. Truman. Together, nearly 20 warships, more than a dozen air squadrons, approximately 50,000 American troops across the theater. The opening strikes hit Iranian nuclear facilities, missile infrastructure, and command centers. Western media reported significant damage. Officials suggested the operation could be over in days. Iran's response was immediate. Within 72 hours, the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil supplies pass daily, was effectively closed to commercial shipping. Iranian missile and drone strikes hit American bases across the region. Iranian allied forces in Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon activated simultaneously. By late March, Brent crude had reached $144.42 per barrel, the highest level in recorded history. By early April, American interceptor stockpiles were under strain. The cost-exchange ratio, Iranian drones at $20,000 to $50,000 per unit against American interceptors at $3 million to $10 million each, was bleeding U.S. resources at a rate that military planners had not publicly acknowledged. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group repositioned away from the Persian Gulf, described officially as routine tactical repositioning, noted by every intelligence service in the world as something else entirely. And the war goals? Iran's nuclear program had not been destroyed. Iran's military was still operational, and the Iranian government, rather than collapsing, was more unified than at any point in recent memory, with massive public demonstrations of support reported in Tehran even during active bombardment. Then came April 8th, the ceasefire, Pakistan as mediator, Trump accepting Iran's 10-point proposal as a workable basis on which to negotiate, and Vance boarding a plane to Islamabad. Those are the facts. Now let me tell you what they mean. Here is the game theory layer, and this is where it gets important. In any negotiation, leverage comes from one of two sources. Either you have something the other side desperately needs, or you can credibly threaten something the other side desperately fears. America entered this war believing it had both. It had the military capability to destroy Iran's infrastructure, which Iran feared, and it controlled the sanctions architecture that Iran desperately needed lifted to stabilize its economy. 41 days later, that leverage has been substantially eroded. Here is why. Military threats only function as leverage if the threatened party believes the threat will be executed at a scale that changes the fundamental situation. America threatened catastrophic attacks on Iranian civilian infrastructure. Trump said, "A whole civilization will die tonight." And then, hours before the deadline, America accepted a 2-week pause and sent Vance to Islamabad. The lesson Iran takes from this sequence is not that America is generous. The lesson is that America blinked. And once an adversary learns that your most extreme threat is negotiable, every subsequent threat is discounted. This is one of the most fundamental principles in game theory. It is called credibility erosion, and it is very difficult to reverse once it has occurred. Now look at Iran's leverage at the Islamabad table. First, the Strait of Hormuz. Iran still controls it. As of this morning, only a handful of vessels have transited since the ceasefire. Iran has now established, de facto, not de jure, but in practice, the principle that it can regulate access to this waterway. That is a permanent structural shift in the regional balance of power, regardless of what any agreement says on paper. Second, the economic pain. Oil at $95 per barrel, still 30% above pre-war levels, continues to pressure the global economy. Every day the strait remains functionally restricted, the political cost for the Trump administration increases. Iran knows this. Iran's entire strategy for the past 40 years has been built around making American imperial maintenance more expensive than American political will can sustain. Third, the 10-point proposal itself. Read this carefully because it is extraordinary. Iran is not coming to Islamabad with vague aspirations. Iran came with a written 10-point document that Trump has already publicly accepted as the basis for talks. This means the starting point of the negotiation is Iran's document. The United States is not dictating terms. It is responding to Iranian terms. This has never happened before in U.S.-Iran relations, not once since 1979. History offers a very precise parallel here. In March 1968, President Lyndon Johnson announced he would not seek re-election and called for peace talks with North Vietnam. The Paris peace talks began in May 1968. But here is the structural reality that Johnson inherited and Nixon later managed. America came to Paris having failed to achieve its military objectives. North Vietnam had not been bombed into submission. The Viet Cong had not been destroyed. The South Vietnamese government had not been stabilized. And the American public's support for the war had collapsed after the Tet Offensive. What America wanted from Paris was a face-saving exit, a framework that could be called peace with honor, something that would allow American forces to withdraw without it looking like a defeat. North Vietnam understood this perfectly, and so Hanoi used the talks not to negotiate a genuine settlement, but to extract maximum concessions from an adversary that needed to leave more than it needed to win. The parallels to Islamabad are structural, not incidental. Trump needs to show the American public, 60% of whom oppose this war, that the conflict is ending. He needs oil prices to come down. He needs the global economy to stabilize. He needs a framework he can describe as a victory. Iran needs the sanctions lifted. Iran needs security guarantees. Iran needs the Strait of Hormuz to return to Iranian strategic leverage rather than Iranian military blockade, because a permanent blockade hurts Iran's oil revenues too. Both sides have incentives to reach a deal. But the question is, who needs the deal more urgently? And the answer, based on the structural analysis, is Washington. Now let me go deeper. Here is the invisible layer. There is something extraordinary hidden inside Iran's 10-point proposal that almost no Western media outlet has examined carefully. Let me walk you through the specific points that have been publicly released, because the details reveal the true scope of what Iran is demanding. Iran's conditions include a complete halt to U.S. and Israeli strikes on all regional actors, meaning Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraqi resistance forces must be included. The lifting of sanctions, a guarantee of Iran's right to enrich uranium, the withdrawal of American military forces from the Gulf region, and, crucially, a recognition of Iran's role as a legitimate regional power with full diplomatic standing. This is not a list of temporary tactical concessions. This is a structural redesign of the Middle East's security architecture. Iran is not asking America to pause. Iran is asking America to leave. And here is the most significant element. Trump said Iran's 10-point proposal was a workable basis on which to negotiate. He did not reject any of the points. He did not say uranium enrichment was non-negotiable. In fact, Vance was forced to clarify the U.S. position on enrichment separately, suggesting the administration's own internal alignment on this point is not settled. What does it mean when the President of the United States describes a hostile powers list of demands as workable? It means the opening position of the negotiation has already been conceded to the other side. Let me now address the question everyone is avoiding. What are America's actual red lines at Islamabad? What will Washington not concede? Based on the public record, the Trump administration has stated three things clearly. The Strait of Hormuz must open without tolls. Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. American troops will remain in the region. But here is the structural problem. Iran's 10-point proposal directly contradicts all three of those positions. The ceasefire is already showing that Iran intends to regulate Hormuz transit. Iran's enrichment right is point 3 of its proposal. An American troop withdrawal from the Gulf is embedded in Iran's demand for regional security guarantees. So the question for Islamabad is not whether a deal is possible. The question is how much America concedes to get one. And based on the leverage analysis, based on who needs the deal more urgently, who has established facts on the ground, and whose military credibility has been most damaged in the last 41 days, the structural answer points in one direction. Iran goes into Islamabad knowing that time is on its side. America goes in knowing it needs a deal before the 2 weeks expire, before the next escalation cycle begins, before the economic pressure becomes politically unmanageable. That asymmetry of urgency is the most important fact about these negotiations. More important than any specific point on any specific proposal. More important than what Vance says in front of the cameras. Urgency is leverage. And right now, America has more urgency than Iran. Here is where this ends. 41 days ago, America launched a war with 3 goals: end the nuclear program, destroy the military, achieve regime change. None of those goals have been achieved. Today, America's vice president is sitting in Islamabad discussing the terms of Iran's own 10-point proposal, a proposal that includes Iranian enrichment rights, regional power recognition, and the restructuring of America's military presence in the Gulf. The 1979 Iranian Revolution changed the Middle East for a generation. The 2026 Islamabad talks, if they produce a settlement, will change it for another. Not because Iran won on the battlefield. That argument is more complex and more contested. But because Iran demonstrated something that changes every future calculation, that it can sustain a war with the most powerful military in human history, close the world's most important oil choke point, force a ceasefire on its own terms, and bring American negotiators to a third country to discuss Iranian proposals. That demonstration of strategic resilience is the real outcome of the last 41 days. And the Islamabad talks are not a sequel. They are the final act. This is not prophecy. This is structural history combined with game theory. The evidence is in the facts, the war goals, the leverage positions, the timeline, the text of Iran's own proposal. Look at the evidence, question the framing, and follow the logic wherever it leads, because whoever controls the narrative of who won in Islamabad will shape the politics of the next decade. And right now, Iran is writing that narrative.